So my name is Joe Fiorini, for those of you who may not know me. I actually started this group in 2007 and did, when I first started doing Ruby and Rails and all that fun stuff, and then kind of moved on to doing a lot of JavaScript lately. And that kind of leads into this talk. So the working title of this talk is Asset Happiness, Replacing the Rails Asset Pipeline with Grunt and Bower. So what I want to kind of go through is give you some, just to make sure we're all on the same page, is give kind of a background on the Rails asset pipeline, and then talk a little bit about some of the tools that we use in our JavaScript environments, specifically Grunt, Bower, and RequireJS. And then we'll talk a little bit about, show you HalfPipe, which is a gem that I've written to makes it a lot easier to use something like Grunt in Rails. And then some of my plans for the future of HalfPipe to make it even more awesome than it is now. So first off, some background on the asset pipeline. The asset pipeline came out with Rails 3.1, and has everyone used Rails recently? Most of you, some of you, maybe not. So good. So the asset pipeline, you may also hear the term sprockets. Sprockets is the library that powers the asset pipeline, but I think it's not incredibly obvious what sprockets actually does. So that's what I wanted to talk through here. The first thing that it does for you is, so JavaScript and style sheets, we tend to concatenate them and like put them all together into one file. Back in the day when we first started doing a lot of web development with lots and lots of files, it wasn't quickly before we started hitting the limits of the browser. So most browsers can only keep a couple, like 2 or 3, back in the day at least, they can only keep like 2 HTTP connections open at a time. So if you have JavaScript in 5 or 6 different files, then you're going to have to wait. You're going to have all your files are going to have to wait until all the other files are done downloading before they even start, which is going to make your page really slow to load. So what developers started doing is, well, we want to be able to develop in multiple files. We want to be able to keep our JavaScript nice and spread out, but we want to be able to keep we want the browser to be able to download things quickly. So we wrote tools that would let us concatenate all of our JavaScript together into one file. That way, we could be happy, keep everything kind of sorted and organized the way we wanted to. The browsers could be happy, but now we've got all these tools to do that job for us. And Sprockets is one such tool. So when you load a page in a Rails app now, all of your JavaScript files are going to get all put together into one big file, or all of your style sheets are going to get put together into one big file, and makes it nice and quick for the browser. So another thing that Sprockets does is it compiles languages into CSS and JavaScript. So it runs like, if you want to use CoffeeScript, then it'll compile CoffeeScript. If you want to use Sass, it'll compile Sass into CSS, or it'll compile less into CSS. It'll handle that for you. You can get plugins to do other things like compress images, or build sprites, or process fonts. One of the big problems with with front-end development, especially, is third-party code. There's never been anything like Ruby gems for third-party code. So one of the things that Sprockets did is let you put assets into gems. So you could have JavaScript and style sheets in your gems, fonts, whatever assets you wanted. You have images in gems, and you're able to still load them into your site very easily. So these are a few of the libraries that have Rails gems associated with them that you can use Sprockets to load. But one of the things that I think it's lost in the fun and excitement of Sprockets is that it's really just one choice amongst many for doing this job. There are a number of tools out there. The 4 that I picked here are ones that are possible to use in Ruby, but there's I found a page with probably 12 different options for Django. So there's tons and tons of tools to do this stuff. And there's lots of other ways to do it. I had to learn this the hard way because I started getting into some different kind of development. So for a few years I was writing Rails apps all the time, and then I started writing some static websites and playing with some things outside of Rails, and I realized that that when you're building in that kind of a mode, there's a need to have what Sprockets does. And so I started kind of putting some things together on my own to do that. But I started to sit down and really think about, what is it that I need? What is it that Sprockets gives me that I don't have now? And what do I need? And a few things I came up with that I really liked is Python has everything in Python. You have explicit import and export, which means that all of your files declare their dependencies at the top, and they explicitly say what other people have access to in their code. This is something we don't really have in Ruby. You know, there is a keyword called private, but it's kind of a joke. So and when you require something, it's required in your entire app, and it's been a source of a lot of bugs that I've had to track down in Ruby. So I decided I don't want that in JavaScript anymore. I really want to have explicit import and export. And like I said, I want to have each file declare its dependencies, because I feel like looking at that, it's just a lot clearer when my team members get into the code where everything comes from, and then we don't get a lot of questions on, well, where's this skip coming from? Where's that coming from? Having every file wrapped in a closure, so keeping everything nice and tightly scoped, so that you don't have globals everywhere. We learned a long time ago globals aren't great. Once again, no globals. But one of the things that Sprockets does really nicely that you don't get with most asset packagers is having only one file for production, but having your files still split out into multiple while you're developing. So if you go into the browser and you want to debug, you don't want to have to like trace down, oh, where was this line of code in this one big file throughout all these multiple files. So in Sprockets, when you load your page in development, it splits everything out into separate script tags. It's really nice. But one of the things that Sprockets does not have that I wanted is something that's kind of at least somewhat of a standard. If you get something that's a standard, then at least you've got a chance that somebody else coming in is going to know this thing. Whereas with something like Sprockets, you got to learn it. Everybody coming in who hasn't used it before has to learn it themselves. So the tool that I found to meet this criteria was a tool called RequireJS. And RequireJS is based on a spec called AMD. I don't think it's an official finalized spec, but it's something that's in development that has a very, very large community behind it. And the basic idea is you define a module. This would be an entire JavaScript file. So you would define a module. You would give it the requirements for that module. So in this case, it's an array with names of other modules. So jQuery. And then you would give it a function or possibly an object that takes as its parameters the modules that it required. And then whatever this function returns becomes that module. So if I required it in another file, then it would go and run this code and return back this date picker function, and now I would have access to that in my other module. So it keeps everything very tightly scoped so that I don't have to worry about things leaking out in the global namespace.
Did that module get a name anywhere, or is that like by the file?
Excellent question. That comes from it comes from the file name. You do have the option of giving a name as the first parameter, but typically I just let the file name take care of it. Mm-hmm. If anyone else has questions, please feel free to shout them out. This is what optimized RequireJS looks like. So when it goes and concatenates the code, it minifies the code for you and puts it all together into this big jumbled up blob of mess that you don't want to have to look at or mess with, but you don't have to. The browser does. So it was great. I had my module loading. I had all that down. But what I did, another thing I started to realize I needed was needed to be able to run my unit tests pretty easily, and I needed to be able to build the modules with the optimizer in a very quick, repeatable fashion. So I didn't have to run run the command with all the flags and everything. I wanted to be able to serve up, quickly serve up like an example app, or quickly serve up some HTML in my code, and I wanted to be able to run my tests and rebuild my code based on file changes, kind of like Guard does for you in Ruby. And when I started looking around for tools that helped me solve this problem, that's when I came across Grunt. And Grunt is a task runner for JavaScript. So you think of kind of like Rig, but it's a little bit different. So with Grunt, you compose tasks together to build up a workflow. So you have lots and lots and lots of small tasks, very small tasks that do one specific thing, and you combine them all together to make one larger task that is your workflow. And everything's configured in gruntfile.js. So this is a grunt file. I know it's hard to see. I'll zoom in on this here in a moment, but this is a grunt file, and the way that it works is you load your tasks, you configure them, and then you build up your bigger workflow-based tasks at the end. You'll see it now. So the first step, we load tasks, and this is loading tasks from NPM. NPM is the package manager so these are all Node.js-based tools that I'll be talking about. So we load tasks from NPM, and we're loading here a RequireJS task that builds and optimizes RequireJS files, a copy task that copies files, a QUnit task that runs QUnit tests, and a watch task that watches for files to change and then runs tasks based on that. That's all any of these tasks do. None of them do any more. The RequireJS task doesn't run tests. The QUnit test doesn't build files. The copy task doesn't watch files. The watch task doesn't copy files. They all just do one specific thing, and only that thing. Even the watch task doesn't even run tasks for you. You tell it what tasks you want it to run, not the other way around. So then to configure the tasks, you call grunt.initconfig with an object, and that object is just made up of all your task options. So each option is named after the task. So like QUnit, RequireJS, watch, and copy, and then they all take a list of files that they act on. So like watch takes an array of files here, a glob pattern. I tell it watch on all the tests, all the lib, and all the vendor files, and then run JS hint and QUnit when I make changes. So that'll lint everything and run my tests. Copy. I tell it that I want to copy main.js over to the dist folder when I'm done. So this is the basic configuration of the tasks. And then at the end, I build up my workflows. So I can tell it, this is also the same way you create your own tasks, called grunt.registerTask. And if I pass it a function, I can actually create a more advanced task. But if I want to compose tasks, I give it an array. So I say register task default. So if I just run grunt and hit enter, this is what it's going to run. Connect server and watch. And I think I took connect out. I had to take connect out because of space, but the build task will run my JS hint, RequireJS, and copy. So it'll lint my JavaScript first. It'll build all the files, and then it'll copy them over to the dist folder. What questions so far? Anything?
You want to say what the Connect thing is?
Yeah, Connect is kind of like a rack for Node. It's a very small, basic JavaScript web server that lets you create middleware for it. And so the Connect task will let you fire up a server in your task workflow. So we use that at one of our clients. We use Grunt to build the entire site, and we have Connect tasks to load up the server, and we have Connect tasks that will actually proxy to a rack API, so that we have a rack API that actually runs a Sinatra app that runs along with our Grunt server. So it's It's a small thing, but it can get pretty advanced.
So why JS Lint before you actually do the other important stuff? Are you going to actually stop me from being productive if I'm not that great at JavaScript? Or is it just going to error at me, or is it going to...
It just warns. In fact, we have too many warnings right now. No, this is JS Hint, not JS Lint, so there's a difference between the two. JS Lint is much more picky and much less forgiving. Huh? It says JS Hint.
Okay, it's something.
It's the same concept, but it's more forgiving. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah, you can you can configure it like crazy. So great, I got building out of the way, but I still can't manage dependencies. That's still a pain in the butt. Typically, what I would do is just go to find a file like on GitHub, go to the raw link, and then copy and paste it into a file in Vendor. And it's just not a good way to manage things, especially when you're used to using like RequireJS or NPM or something. And so I didn't really have detailed requirements for managing packages. I just wanted something, and I came across Bower that had just started getting some traction. And Bower is exactly what I was looking for. It's a package manager for the browser. So you configure all your packages in a bower.json. It's very similar if you've ever used NPM. It's very similar to the package.json file. You can have the Bower packages. What's great about them is they can be anything that runs in the browser, not just JavaScript. So if you have one of the things that we're starting to use Bower for is we have one of our clients, we have some CSS that needs SAS files that need to be shared across multiple sites. So rather than having to put them in Git submodules, which gets to be kind of a pain, we can use actual Bower packages and version them and release them like we would any other packages. It uses Git as its default transport, but it can also use HTTP. So we actually have some packages that we get from S3 that it just uses the E tag as the version. If you're using Git or if you're using
On that Git, with RequireJS, and specifically Bundler, you can pull in a gem even if it's not already packaged on a gem server. You can pull it in from a local path, unpackaged, and pull it in from Git unpackaged. Does Bower allow that as well?
I believe so. Yes, there is a Bower server, and I've just in the past month or so started looking into that and how that works. So I'm pretty sure that will download over HTTP. Up until that point, everything was pretty much coming off of GitHub. But yeah, now there actually is a server. You can register packages, push them up to the server, and download them.
They don't have to be packaged. They don't have to be packaged.
Right.
If you had, that's my question. Is if you had like a bunch of stuff within development on your machine, could you reference a path?
Oh, reference a path. I'm sorry.
Or reference an unpackaged thing in Git.
Right. Yes, you can reference an unpackaged thing in Git. You can even version with tags and use those tags for what to get from. Path, I don't know if they have that yet, but NPM has NPM link, where it'll symlink your library globally, on your system, and then you can include it in your app that way. I don't know if Bower has that yet. Sure. So Bower is pretty simple. You Bower install a package name, and then you can also Bower install a package with a new pound version or branch or whatever. You can Bower search to find other Bower packages that you might need, or you can use what I like to use, which is this was made by one of the core team members on Bower. Just a really nice little search engine. So you can search. You can see here they've got Bootstrap and jQuery and D3. Lot of really great libraries are already on Bower.
What's the level of adoption from the community? Again, you referenced RequireJS, and it's been around. It's the de facto way. So everything is probably always going to be probably in RequireJS. But there's a lot of JavaScript out there that predates Bower. Are you finding a lot of adoption?
It's getting there, yeah. I mean, I mean, here we've already got D3s on it, jQuery's on it, Bootstrap's on it. This is just the front, the front page. I know there's tons and tons and tons of JavaScript libraries out there. I don't know if there will ever be a de facto standard like Ruby gems, because everybody has to do JavaScript, right? Like with Ruby, you can at least say, I don't like Ruby, so I'm not going to use Ruby. You can't say that about JavaScript. So I don't know if there will ever be a de facto standard, but right now there's a number of different managers out there. Bower seems to be the one that's getting the most traction.
And the argument is that there's not one in Sprockets or in the pipeline, right?
What?
There's not a JavaScript management in Sprockets.
Right, you put them in gems. Sprockets uses gems. And so, yeah, you can do JavaScript dependencies and style sheets in gems. The argument is that, I'll get to that in a minute.
No, I see the problem.
I'm just going to hijack and say that the stuff Bower pulls down does not have to be anything special format-wise. It can just be a collection of files that you would normally... You would probably normally just grab like the jQuery file and put it in a folder called jQuery. This takes the whole Git project for Git jQuery or whatever Bower component you grab and puts it in a folder, and so you have to specify what files you want to grab out of that. So the perk is that you now have versioned dependencies instead of just hopefully looking at some comment on the top of the file and grabbing where you want to go.
Right. Thank you, John.
Yeah, no problem.
Is it named after Jack Bauer? That's the obvious.
I don't know. that'd be worth. There's birds all over their website, so I doubt it, but I have no idea. If it is, then they missed a great branding opportunity. So I've talked about all these tools, but now I want to talk about coming back to Rails. Actually, I think I took out the slide where I talked about the gem thing, so I'll talk about that real quick since you asked. So one of the things I started feeling when I spent about a year or so. I didn't do a whole lot of Rails, but I was starting to use these tools a lot. And when I came back to doing Rails again and using Sprockets, I started to feel like that packaging these assets in gems it seemed like dual maintenance to me. And not to mention, I ran into a lot of libraries, like smaller JavaScript libraries that were in gems that were out of date. And there were probably at least 2 or 3 that I ended up having to fork and update myself because they're out of date. And I don't mind doing that and sending a pull request for it. But at the same time, if it's in Bower and Bower is pulling it straight from the source, or if it's a bigger library and there's a dedicated package maintainer for it, I'd rather just do that. So that was probably one of my big motivations, at least behind switching to Bower.
From an operations perspective, just throw it in there. I would rather not see gems delivering JavaScript assets.
Yeah.
And I would rather not see JavaScript packages delivering gem.
In fact, from an operations perspective, because you know our operations guy, we commit all of our Bower dependencies. So you don't even have to worry about Bower on the server. So Halfpipe, we started using Grunt a lot at DI, and we started using Bower. And one of the other constraints that we had is we have some people at DI who are really, really good at front end development, but who don't have a ton of Rails experience. But they were really good with Grunt and Bower and using some of these tools. So I figured, why do we keep struggling and trying to use this tool that just doesn't really fit our workflow anymore? And so that was when I decided to make Halfpipe. And basically, right now it is Grunt, Bower, RequireJS, and Rails. I moved the code so when you have the asset pipeline, your code is in app assets, JavaScript, app assets, style sheets. I moved those up a level because it was annoying to me to have to keep typing app assets every time I wanted to access a file. So I moved them in app scripts and app styles. And then the rule that I have with Halfpipe is your processed code goes in app, and any other assets that don't get processed go in public. And I thought I had something else in there. Okay, so I'm gonna demo it for you and kind of explain it through the demo. So I'm going to start out by creating a new Rails app. And I'm not going to let it run bundle install because that annoys me. And then I'm going to cd into it. And so we have a regular Rails app. Huh? Yeah. Is that better?
That looks great.
Okay, cool. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to get rid of the sprockets stuff that's in here, and then I'm going to add. So what I'm showing you tonight is currently in alpha releases. I'm trying to just get some people trying it out and get some feedback on it before I make it the official release. But basically, most of what halfpipe is actually just a generator. So I can run Rails G halfpipe install. Actually, first I should probably run bundle install, huh? Might be good. While it's running, I'll explain kind of the overview of what halfpipe is. Is basically mostly it's just an install generator that gets your environment ready to run node tools. So it gives you a package.json. It gives you so you can run npm install. It gives you Bower and it gives you a Bower.json with some default components that you might need, and it gives you a grunt file, and then it gives you a bunch of task configurations.
What if you already had some of those tools installed?
Then it just won't install them. So I think npm's smart enough to ignore that. The npm is a slightly different approach to installing packages. You install packages locally in your project. So when you run npm install, it creates a folder for them right there in your project. It's like if you do a bundle with --path, and then you really only install like a handful of packages globally. So most projects you actually have a lot of duplication. But so now that I have it installed, I can run the generator.
Will npm actually use system level packages?
I don't think it does yet. I don't think it does.
npm is for local over system, but I don't know how it handles bins.
What do you mean?
Like if you have like scripts, so like Grunt depends on Grunt CLI being installed globally. I remember part of Grunt.
Yeah.
I don't remember which part. But if you do like a require a node, it's going to fetch your local install versus your global.
Yeah.
I don't know how it handles scripts and stuff.
Yeah, I don't know. The scripts part I don't know about, but it does. Yeah, it does. Like with Grunt, you install Grunt CLI globally, and then the rest of Grunt you install locally, and you they basically that's all done by them by the website telling you install Grunt CLI globally and don't put it in your package.json. But and there is a warning you'll get if you try to install it locally, but it doesn't. It'll let you. So we run the generator, and it's going to create a package.json. It'll create a Bower RC is a configuration file for Bower, and then it creates a Bower.json, which is the actual your actual packages, your dependencies and stuff. You get a grunt file. It gives you a JS hint file that you can configure the options for linting. Once again, they're warnings, not failures. A JSON file for configuring some of the directories within halfpipe, and then a few changes to your configuration, and then creating the folders for your actual code, adding a few things to git ignore, and then the task configurations themselves. And then it actually does run npm install for you to get everything set up. npm is very chatty. And then these are all the Grunt plugins that are installed. And then it's done.
Is it item
Yes.
Can I
How?
run it again and not waste time?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, Bob's question.
I know what idempotent means, but not in this context. Yeah, yeah. All right, so now we can start. So what in a project where you already have a lot of JavaScript, you'll probably have to move stuff around. But since since this is a new app, we obviously don't have any actual JavaScript in it yet. There's not much to move, but basically what we have now is a Grunt file that it looks a little bit different because I'm using some plugins that make the Grunt file a little nicer. So there's a plugin called load grunt tasks, so that instead of having to load each individual task with that load npm task function, you just require load grunt tasks and pass it your Grunt instance, and it'll load everything for you. I think I could probably take that one out now. And then we load all the task configurations from files under the tasks folder. So tasks, options, and then a folder for each task. And then we register our tasks. So the default task does a build, and then build debug. So there's build debug and build public. So the way, just like Rails has its environments, Halfpipe has a debug environment and a public environment. So the debug environment is going to build your JavaScripts without minifying them. It'll concatenate them, but it'll include source maps. And source maps are basically files that point to the original file where that came from on your hard drive. So Chrome supports this, and I'm pretty sure Safari and Firefox do now too. So when you're in the inspector, you'll actually see references to, like if you have exceptions or stack traces or whatever, you'll see references to the original files, not the files that not the full concatenated one. Yeah.
Have you found that to be working pretty well?
Yeah, I actually have. I've been able to. I get stack traces with it, and I can debug. I can actually put breakpoints in the original files, and the debugger will pick them up.
Yeah, that actually.
Yeah, I know, it's so nice.
So we had GWT at a previous.
Uh huh.
And like GWT had run a development server to actually do JavaScript debugging.
Uh-huh.
And then we'll do it your entire night.
Oh man, I can believe it. So build debug runs clean, which kills any build files that were there before. Copy prepare, which takes all of your style sheets and all of the files that it's going to build, copies them into a temp folder. And then it runs RequireJS debug, which builds RequireJS in the debug configuration, and Sass debug, which builds all your Sass code in the debug configuration, and then copies that over to, and then those I think build themselves out to public, those build themselves into temp public, which is where they get served for you later. Build public does the same thing, but uses public configurations, which means that public being they're going to go in the public folder eventually. So RequireJS public is gonna minify and really make it ready for production. Sass public, same thing, and then the task you can't see because my zoom button doesn't seem to be zooming properly. There we go. Copy finalize will then copy finalize will take all of your files that got built from the temp public directory and copy them into public assets. So then they get served up in /assets/ scripts or /assets/styles for including in your site.
Does that manage cache busting and inversions using hash?
Not yet.
Okay.
That's one of the next things I want to add. There's a grunt rev task there's a task called grunt rev that does that. But that's part of the reason why this is a generator and not built in, not built somewhere in a gem. It's something you could easily add it if you needed to. Yeah.
The cache busting question.
Uh-huh.
Do people put the cache in the file name or like in the query string? Like, what is the normal way to do that in Rails?
So the file name.
Okay.
File name all the time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. File name.
Thank
Your
you.
CDN cares about file names. Your CDN does not care about parameters.
Right. So the other thing I wanted to show you is this is an old. I think this is actually an older. I haven't updated the generator. I've been working on this a lot over the weekend. So this is actually supposed to be JavaScript include tag, and not have assets/scripts. But so you include JavaScript and style sheets pretty much like normal, but the helpers go through half-pipe instead of through the default Rails, and so then to run it, you can run grunt server, and oh wait, not running. All right, hang on. I'm going to. What's the problem? What's your problem there? Okay. So these need to be. Oh, I'm gonna go to a working copy. Sorry, I'll figure that out. But so this is one I already have set up that I know should be working. I know, right? So the main thing I wanted to show you is I run grunt server, and it starts up the server on localhost 3000. And if I go to localhost 3000, I get my Rails app. So the grunt server command runs a preview server, a connect server to serve your assets, and it also fires up your Rails server and proxies to it for you. So you don't have to have two servers running while you're trying to develop. But if you're not working on assets, so teams are typically, at least the teams I work on, a lot of times you have one person working on assets and somebody who does more JavaScript or more CSS than everyone else. You could also just the generator will run a public build for you to make sure everything's set up and working, and so you could just run Rails server like normal.
How'd you run it not normal?
Grunt server. So you can run grunt server if you're developing on the assets, or you can run Rails server and just have the public versions of all the assets running, and you never have to worry about never have to worry about the assets.
At least once, right?
Huh?
You have to run grunt at least once.
Yes.
To create the template.
Yes, and the generator will do that. If you run the generator, it will do that for you. If you're not the one who runs the generator, then yeah, you have to run it at least once. Yeah.
Both of those ways that you started the server will both pull the JavaScript from half-pipe, like half-pipe generated or whatever.
The grunt built files, correct?
So it doesn't fall back like when you do the Rails server, it doesn't fall back to the asset pipeline or whatever.
No, there's no. So that's the one thing in this environment. There is no asset pipeline, but one thing. So to help with that, The Bower JSON in the latest alpha, not the one that I generated this from, includes jQuery.js by default, which is the Rails.js stuff. So you can still use all the remote helpers and everything that you're used to. And then, yeah, that works pretty well. There's also, if you really, really, really like turbolinks, there's also PJAX, which is available through Bower, which is what turbolinks is built on top of. But I'm not the biggest fan of turbolinks, so that doesn't bother me. So, what other questions before I continue? Almost done. But yes?
What is you to application.rb?
All right.
Because that was the only thing I saw that really upset me in your first bootstrap.
You have pop eyes over there.
Yep. Don't touch application.rb. Damn.
I comment out sprocket/railtie.
That's it?
I think that was it. And, oh yeah, so I changed require rails/all to be individual requires for each railtie for each gem, and then or I comment out sprockets railtie if it's there.
So if we're not, so okay, yeah.
I basically unrequire sprockets. That's it. Yeah.
I had a question about how difficult it was replacing sprockets, just kind of from your standpoint.
Not really that hard. I mean, most of it was finding the right run tasks. Honestly, it really wasn't that bad. I'll tell you the hardest parts actually were getting used to RequireJS and figuring out that that configuring RequireJS right meant duplicating my. Originally, it meant duplicating all of my path setups based on if I was on the web or if I was optimizing. I've since fixed that, and there's only one configuration for RequireJS now, not two, as far as the setting up the paths go. But that was honestly probably the hardest part and led to the most problems in production for us. But other than that, it's just been getting the right grunt tests. Finding that jQuery.js on Bower was amazing. Like that was incredibly helpful because we still use the remote stuff quite a bit, and that goes a long way towards writing some stuff quickly. So, yeah.
Have you given any consideration to decoupling this from Rails? And I asked specifically out of personal interest in that. We don't use Rails. We use Goliath and stuff with that machine, a lot of stuff. And John here set up Grunt and Bower and a lot of the things that you're talking about with that. But looking at the generator and what I saw go by there, about the only things I saw that were Rails specific were the one you used the Rails generator, and two, you had to change the app.rb. So there's really nothing in there that couldn't work with a lot of different web frameworks such as Goliath or Sonata, or even potentially say Web Machine and Erlang, which we use too. Have you given any consideration to decoupling from Rails?
Yes, absolutely. I think eventually that is a. I've thought a lot about it actually. I originally was going to build this so that like I was going to try to build it for everything at once, and I quickly came to the conclusion I don't have time for that. So I think I'm going to let the use cases kind of drive that implementation, and if like as soon as people, right now I just want to get people using it, and I want to get feedback on it. I want to make sure the workflow is good and it's going to work for people. It's going to work for as many people as possible. Once we get that down, then I can look at. I mean, it's just a generator. Is really the main thing. And in fact, this kind of leads into the next part of what I was going to. I'm almost done, but the next part of what I was going to talk about was just the future of Halfpipe. So Yeoman is another node tool that it integrates with Grunt and Bower pretty well, and it's basically Rails generators for node projects. But they've gone I think a little beyond Rails generators with their just with the user experience and the interaction with it. It does a lot more like prompting you for things. The output that it gives you looks a lot nicer and it's easier to read as it's flying by. And so where I actually want to move Halfpipe in the future is an initial setup generator to get you going with npm Bower and ready to go with Sass and Grunt and the tools, and then application specific templates. So rather than it getting you set up and ready to go with RequireJS, it just gets you ready to build npm stuff and Grunt stuff in your environment. And that could be Rails. That could be, I mean, you could probably rewrite that same thing in about a handful of files for all different frameworks. And then once you're there, any of these application templates are available to you. But one of the problems that comes in, and one of the things I'm still thinking about with this is all the different frameworks have different folder structures. So Rails has people want to have things on their app. So I'm not going to try to buck that convention because I want something that can be used across frameworks. I want to try to go with that, but then how do you make it so that those templates will work in Rails and work with Web Machine, which is going to have a completely different convention and style than anything else. So those are some of the things. Those are some of the issues with that. But it's definitely something I would like to do. But need to get the users first. So yeah, that's basically it. Thanks for coming out. I want to mention also, I forgot to mention this at the beginning, the company I work for, DI, we're a consulting company out in Rocky River. We do a lot of Rails. We're using Halfpipe now in pretty much all of our projects, and we're looking for Ruby and JavaScript devs. So junior, senior level Ruby, JavaScript devs. So if anyone's interested, feel free to come and talk to me afterwards, or Josh, or Don, or Ben, or Brad, any one of us. This is like the best turnout we've had, I think, ever. Cool. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.